Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Faye and Tom's Divorce Coaching Podcast. Today we have another lovely guest with us. We have Rosalind Fitzgerald from Rayden Solicitors, and we're going to be talking about an experience that's both, well, you have personal and professional input really, don't you, Rosalind, I suppose? So we'd like to introduce yourself and tell everyone what we're talking about today.
Yeah, hi, my name's Rosalind and I'm a legal director at Rayden Solicitors. I am a family law solicitor. I've specialised in family law since about 2002, and I am going to be talking about nesting both from a professional perspective and also a personal perspective, because I have just in my own separation completed about a year of a nesting arrangement. So lots to say about it. I've got lots of clients who have also either been interested in it or themselves have been nesting.
Oh, I'm so excited, Rosalind, about this one because I know nothing about nesting. I know about empty nest syndrome, when children go to university and the parents are left wondering, oh my gosh, what do we do now? But nothing about nesting. So I'm really excited about this one, Tom. Obviously, you know a little bit more about it than I do. But I've not got any experience. I don't know anyone who does it. What about you, Tom? Do you know anyone that does nesting?
I do. I've got a number of people I know both personally and professionally, but only in the recent year, maybe 18 months, it seems to be quite a new phenomenon. And actually, it's something that has come up quite a lot within the last 6 months alone with clients where I'm working with both parties as looking at options and solutions to the situation. So, I mean, how did it start for you, Rosalind, from a personal perspective? And how did the situation or I suppose actually we should probably start with what is nesting? Go on, you kick us off.
I think that's a good question, and I think most sort of in the family law world we know what nesting is, but certainly not necessarily all of my clients have heard of the phrase. So nesting is where the children will stay in the family home in a separation situation, and the parents will go to and from. So in my personal circumstances, we had a flat which I inherited a number of years ago when my mum died, and so we had another property. We used to rent it out, but that was there. Where the parents go can be all sorts of different places. Some might stay with family members. You might have a holiday home. You may rent a property, maybe two properties specifically to facilitate this arrangement. You may rent a room or sleep on a friend's sofa. But the key part of a nesting arrangement is that instead of a traditional parents move out as two separate homes, or one stays in a house and the other finds somewhere else to live, and the children go backwards and forwards, the children stay put. It's the parents who have to go backwards and forwards. So the imagery is of the birds, the baby birds in the nest, and the parents being the adult birds who come in to feed and look after them, and are there at different times. And so yeah, that's what nesting is in a nutshell. And for me, it was pretty much a sort of no-brainer because we had a second property. And so when we looked at separating, it just seemed to sort of happen organically for me, in that there was a property that was available, and we already had been doing separate parenting under the same roof. So we knew which days we were in charge, and then it was just the next step for me personally, that we would start being out of the house whilst the other parent was in charge and come backwards and forwards. But for many of my clients, they have these conversations, it can either happen organically, there's a really obvious solution, or they might come and see me and it's a solution that they haven't thought about. And then I say, well, what about this? And then the nesting can happen.
It actually sounds like a really kind of no-brainer when you describe it the way that you have. I'm sitting there thinking, well, yeah, why should the children have to go from one house to another? They didn't ask for the separation or divorce, so why should they have to be the ones to make the changes? So when you describe it like that, it does make perfect sense. But I imagine, actually talking about it and doing it and setting it up are two different things.
Yeah. And it's often sort of driven by, you know, financial concerns, what's going to be possible financially. It's sometimes an interim step. So as I said, for me, it happens organically from a period of separate parenting under the same roof to nesting. And we've actually now in a third stage where we've now got 2 separate homes, and the children are just about starting to go between the 2 homes instead of the parents. So we've moved on. But I think, you know, when we have these conversations with our clients who are thinking about separating, there's the long-term goal of where you want to be, and sometimes that is it's often having the 2 separate homes, but sometimes getting to that and how you do that is quite difficult. And this interim stage, it may not be a perfect long-term solution, and there are definitely downsides, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but it often is a transitional stage. Yeah,
I think that's a lovely way to kind of explain it as well, because it is all too often, it's all too challenging, isn't it, to think about when you are separating, you had that part of the conversation. And in your, just with your own example there, you said that you guys had already built your own co-parenting plan while you're still cohabitating, which is a great initial first step as well, which is a lot of the work that I know that I do with clients, and Faye does as well, about how to go about that and build their co-parenting plan while they're still living together. But like I say, I suppose trying to step away from that big scary mountain idea of, well, now what do we do? Where do we live? Do we sell the house? Who buys the other one out, etc.? And it can make a much easier transition for the kids. I mean, was it your professional experience that made you, did you lead that topic of conversation, go, well, how about nesting? Is that the next phase? Or was it, because you said it was quite mutual, the next logical step, but someone must have gone, hey, I've got an idea.
Yeah, I think we just sort of, well, should we give notice to those tenants, and we'll start spending time separately instead of being separate under the same roof. So for us, it was pretty amicable and organic, and just kind of happens as a natural first step. But I think for others, you know, you would have to think about it quite carefully. And as well as that transitional period being perhaps a stepping stone, for us, we were already separate parenting. But for many parents, I think it would be a transitional step, and maybe even a trial period, either a trial for the parents separating or a trial for co-parenting, and seeing what works and enabling the children to stay in their familiar home, you know, with their brownies and their football clubs down the road, and, you know, rather than having to commute from dad's moved out and lives, you know, an hour away now. So yeah, I think it's a good trial for the parents as well, in terms of how the parenting is going to work separately, and being quite gentle for both parents and children.
Yeah, and I think that, I suppose, one of the biggest issues maybe that some might find in the first instance, and I don't know if you find this with your clients, is it around the circumstance of ability, feasibility, I suppose, and means of, can we afford to, do we have a second property? You were mentioning about, is someone go where the parent, doesn't really matter where the parents go really, but I suppose that in itself can cause potential issues if you've got one parent's going to stay with family and you've got one parent that's maybe going to stay with a new friend, and things like that, where actually that could potentially cause issues as well. So what was one of the biggest challenges for you guys then? Because it sounds very amicable and it sounds like it was a nice transition, etc., and but obviously that's not the same for a lot of people. So
Yeah.
What was the hardest thing for you?
I think actually for me it was backwards and forwards. So our separated parenting agreement it had quite a lot of transitions, and that was something I put in place because my youngest, I felt she wouldn't cope having long periods away from each of us. So we had our personal arrangement was Mondays and Tuesdays mine, Wednesdays and Thursdays dad does. If I did Friday, then he'd do Saturday, Sunday, and we'd swap that Friday. So on the alternate week, he'd do Friday, I'd do Saturday, Sunday. And that's actually a lot of transitions. Now, I'd put that in place for the kids, and it was us that was going backwards and forwards. But actually, I thought, I'm just living out the suitcase here. And that was really challenging, the sort of, and sometimes, I'd be at the flat and think, oh, I haven't got the, work shoes that I want for tomorrow's meeting. And actually, although it's a challenge for myself, I'm glad that I experienced that challenge instead of my children experiencing that challenge, because I thought that was the best for the children. But now we're doing, actually, as we're moving on from that, actually, I don't want lots of backwards and forwards for the kids because I've done it, and that is quite challenging. There's lots of sort of minor things. I think you have to get on pretty well, because there is shared space, and how you manage that space is going to depend on your circumstances. For us, we were sharing both our external property, the non-nest property, and the nest. For some families, it might work to have people going to separate places, but the nest is always shared. So you've got to think about your personal space, your privacy, just the little things that probably annoyed you in together, like, well, he never empties the dishwasher, and when I leave the house on a Tuesday night, the dishwasher's always empty. Small things like that. You're coming back into shared space, so you're separating, but you're not really. And then there's all, I think, the sort of normal challenges which happens with co-parenting, where you've got different approaches from both parents. And when I'm with this parent, this is how they parent, and the other parent parents in a different way. And I think that can, I think that can work. Children understand that parents parent differently, but it may be more exacerbated by the fact there's a routine in the family home, and if one parent doesn't stick to that routine or does things a bit differently, small things like, well, Mum lets me eat in the lounge, but when I'm with other parent, that is a no-go. Just little things like that. But these are challenges that I think co-parents have, whether you're nesting or not, to actually try and live with. Children are going to have different experiences with both parents, and we may not all do things the same, and there's a huge spectrum of sort of okay parenting, and can you live with what the other parent is doing. But I think it's a bit more intense when the parenting is happening in the same space.
So is there quite a lot of boundary setting? Sorry, is there quite a lot of boundary setting that needs to be agreed, both when you're doing the co-parenting, but also with the nesting? And the reason I ask is that I know of someone who was doing this, and like you, they also shared the non-nest property. One of the issues for them was little things about like the dishwasher and the clothes and everything, but also one of them having a new partner. And there was a boundary around that person's not allowed in either of the homes. They actually had to, what they actually created, one of their parts of their boundaries, they created a bit of a layover, a period of time between going to the other homes, and they had cleaners come in and basically put everything back to normal, so that when mum or dad arrived at the non-nest home, everything was already done as it should, and they still didn't feel having to walk around and pick up dirty towels and everything like that. And I was just wondering, is that still quite a challenging situation to kind of continue to do that when you move into that next phase of nesting?
Yeah, I think that's really important, to have those boundaries and talk about expectations and how you use the shared space. And I mean, sort of new partner in shared space is probably a area that's extremely difficult to tackle. I mean, my approach was just one of extreme tolerance and just letting everything go, which I advise to clients often. Do you have to pick this fight, and what's your ultimate goal? So we were probably less about boundaries and more about just as much tolerance as possible, and that works for us. But it's not going to work for everybody. We were both quite laid back about it.
I loved it when you said earlier that you felt like you were living out a suitcase, because I can remember my daughter telling me this a few years ago, that she felt as a youngster that she was living out a suitcase. And it's so nice and refreshing to hear that role reversal of the parents and saying, well, this is how children must feel. And it's kind of good. I think every separated parent should have a little bit of that, to actually put themselves in their children's shoes. And I'm guessing what I want to ask as well is, when you first mention this to clients, what is their reaction when you suggest it to them? Is it very much, no, we're not going there? Or are they open to learning more about it?
I think it's really varied. So sometimes it's a no-brainer because there's a second property. I've had a client who's used a holiday home, which is actually about 4 hours away, but it works for them because they're week on, week off. So they don't mind doing the journey once a week. For others, it's something, well, have you considered this? Sometimes it comes about because of financial constraints. So whilst they would ideally, maybe one would like to sell the property now and, release equity that's tied up in a main family home and for both to purchase, that's not something that happens tomorrow. And, you know, if things are very difficult or they're desperate to get on with that separation, saying, I can't necessarily afford to, you know, do what I want to do right now. Sometimes it's an interim financial step as well. It's not something that I would necessarily suggest in every case. Sometimes, you know, certainly I think in cases of, you know, if there's abuse or control, I think having that shared space would be extraordinarily difficult and possibly, you know, leave a client open to further abuse. I do think it's an arrangement where you have to get on pretty well. So I tend to suggest it to the clients where I think it's going to work. Or, you know, if they say, well, I've been going out and spending the week on the sofa at my mum's. So, well, have you thought about maybe sharing that responsibility and, you know, coming back in and parenting, and then your ex finding somewhere to stay for, you know, or, okay, you can't necessarily afford to rent a whole, you know, property that's suitable for the children to, you know, let's say you need a 3-bedroom children for your kids, but you can't afford a 1-bed flat. So, you know, it's just one of the solutions, I think, in the sort of many solutions and many different outcomes and interim stages that my clients go through in that process.
Yeah, I was thinking about, obviously there's so many different situations where I don't, obviously unfortunately it wouldn't work, would it, with high conflict, etc., where it's really not going to work. But I think the concept of it, and that, like you said, Faye, essentially walking a mile in what the kids' shoes has traditionally been like, so you can really resonate with it, so that when you do come to that next phase that you're now in, Rosalind, I suppose, again, really being able to resonate with what the kids are going through, how they're feeling, and like you said, missing a pair of shoes and things like that. I mean, I remember we didn't do nesting, we went to having 2 separate properties, but we, as quickly as you could, replicated everything and duplicated everything in the alternate house. There was always 2 pairs of school shoes, 2 pairs of everything, sort of thing. So I suppose it's really interesting for adults to get that insight into what it's really like. I mean, you mentioned about your struggles. What would you say were maybe some of your biggest successes, or the bits that you're really proud of them?
I think the fact that we've got through it and we're really amicable, and it's enabled us to be amicable. We were, you know, amicable at the outset, and I said it's a lot of letting it go, which I think is, you know, my biggest kind of piece of advice for people who are trying to have an amicable divorce or separation, full stop. You know, let it go, pick your battles, all of that advice. But yeah, the fact that I understand what the children are going to go through now with the separate properties, and the fact that it's been really a gentle transition for my children. So they've had the kind of separate parenting under the same roof, which I kind of barely noticed. And then the kind of, okay, mum's not here now, dad's here, and vice versa. And that was a really sort of gentle understanding for them. And when then it comes to, okay, there's going to be 2 separate houses, for them that was almost like a plus. Oh great, we know what separate parenting looks like, and we can see it works. And they saw lots of amicable handovers, and now great, we just get a 2nd bedroom. And, you know, and it was all just really seen as a positive. It was a really, really positive thing, as far as kind of separation can be positive. So yeah, I'm a huge fan, actually.
I think you saying, you know, picking your battles and letting things go, it is a great analogy. I've got visions of a parent going to their adult house after spending time with their children and opening the cupboard to find their favourite cereals all being eaten, or the bottle of wine they brought last week has gone. I mean, how do you navigate that? Because I'm very particular over my breakfast, and I think if my pineapple juice wasn't there, I'd be freaking.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think, you know, you can have boundaries, you can work it out. For us, it was just, you know, let's just let it go. You know, we shared space for so long. Actually, I can keep doing this for the kids, and I can, you know, just buy some more pineapple juice. But for everything, you can have separate. You know, if you have to share your space, this is your private space. It is worth thinking about that, because there are, you know, many couples for whom that is not going to work. And, you know, just those little things about, you know, well, can you replenish your milk if you use it? But these are challenges that we all have when we are not separated. So it's just kind of an extension of that. And I think it's the responsibility really falling on the parents to you know, make it work and actually not lose sight of your kind of ultimate aim, which is that to make things easier for the children. And you know, managing those conflicts, and, you know, is it worth it, or do I just want to look at the bigger picture of this is a good arrangement for the kids, and therefore let's make it work, whatever the frustrations are.
Do you think it helped going through this process of transition to help you and your former spouse to becoming more amicable as the relationship morphs and changes into this new way of working with each other? Do you think it really helped?
Yeah, it was certainly a transition for the adults as well as for children. So children getting used to the separate parenting, and I think for the adults as well, I think it can lead in, and it possibly in a more gentle way sort of flags issues that are going to arise when you have separate houses as well. And yeah, just you know, it could be a trial period, and for some people it's almost a trial. They've never separately parented in that way, so it can also, it can form part of a trial separation or a trial parenting. We've changed our parenting arrangements now. We've had the backwards and forwards because we don't want that for the kids. So that trial in itself really helped.
I suppose the question I've got in my mind is you're saying that, and I can see the benefit for parents and definitely for the children, is when one parent, after a few months after the trial's been done, where they're thinking, this isn't working for me, I don't want to carry on with this. But the other parent's thinking, this is great, this is really working. Do you help couples navigate that when there is a disagreement?
That's great.
Yeah, I was going to say it. I think that's always the issue, isn't it? Because you can be in the same home, you can be in separate homes, and you can have disagreements over, and it's how we navigate any of those disagreements, whether it's in a nesting arrangement, whether it's in two separate homes, and it's about how you move then to the point where you are, where it's not working for one person, to the new normal, to the new arrangement. And we have all of the normal tools at our disposal. We have people like you guys who work with our clients in the background, and then all of us sort of the discussions, the mediation, solicitors possibly getting involved to the kind of ultimate resort of, well, we can't agree, and the people who end up in court over those types of arrangements. So I think it is just one of those, we've got to change things, we're separated, how do we as parents find a consensus? What's the best route for us to find a consensus and do everything we can to get there?
I'm really interested to know, what would the kids say? Have they told you what they thought and felt about it, or? I
think yeah, I mean, the
interviewing you now, I feel like I'm interviewing your kids. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's I suppose I haven't specifically asked them because it's just been the norm. But I think it's worked well. They've not had they've not raised concerns, and they know that they don't want the lots of backwards and forwards. Certainly for the older one, who's at secondary, and she's got all her books, and she just wants to settle in one place with her phone. As long as her phone's with her, she's fine. So yeah, maybe that's a conversation for me to have sort of down the line, looking back. How did it go for you kids? But for them, it's just been the norm.
Yeah. Sorry, Faye, I've been asking loads of questions. It's got to be you.
It's okay. I guess, when you said your older daughter, it's worked for her. And my son at the moment, when he's with me, he's got all his friends that live close by. So at the weekend, he can go out with his friends. When he's at his dad's, that doesn't happen as much. So I can definitely see the benefit for children who've got their friends that live nearby, that walk to school with them and things like that. And I suppose for the younger children, just to have that routine of their own bed, their own four walls in their room, just offers that sense of safety. So I kind of am in awe of people that actually do this, because it wasn't available for me to do it when I was going through both of my breakups. And I kind of just want to go back to when you mentioned a parenting agreement. For those people that don't know what one of those is, can you just talk me through what that is and how you go about that?
Sure. I mean, I think these are conversations that we as parents just have on a day-to-day basis anyway, but it's about sitting down and thinking about the big decisions and how you're going to navigate those big decisions. And they can, include how we're going to determine what school our child goes to next, if it's coming on to perhaps a move to secondary or a start at primary school, and how we're going to have those discussions together, how we're going to look to agree that. Sort of all the major issues, what about holidays? Are we okay with, taking abroad, and how long for? So it's not just about time spent, it's about all those decisions, well, how often should the children be able to phone the other parent? Does that feel too invasive if it's, lots of phone calls or otherwise? So there's a sort of whole, I suppose, checklist of decisions to be made about separate parenting, and I think that applies as much in nesting as it does in any other arrangement. But I would advise all of my clients to just go through and really think about, what they want, what a separated parenting arrangement looks like for them, and then to reach that consensus does always require some compromise. It's very rare that any of us, get our lives exactly as we want, and I am just, my strap line is compromise, reach an agreement, because having an agreement, even if it's not the perfect agreement, is better than having a dispute when it comes to children. If that agreement is safe and everyone can live with it. It may not be perfect, but you can live with it. And then, I would advise clients to write that down, how they do it, whether it's in quite an informal way. There's various internet tools. There's the CAFCAS organisation, has a parenting plan on their website. CAFCAS advise courts about welfare of children, but this is for people outside of court. You can also log onto their website, use their parenting agreement, and it's got that sort of checklist that you can go through. People might reach that agreement at mediation, or they might reach it a little bit more formally at solicitors, or a mixture of all of that. And of course, ultimately, people who can't reach agreements and end up in court about children, ultimately they have a very prescribed court order, but that is a blueprint for how things are going to work going forwards. So I think, the nesting is all part of that, and it may be that you've got your agreement as it is in nesting, and that there are going to be changes, and these are not set in stone. Parents can, of course, you can reach agreement and you can change these things at any point along your parenting journey, and as your children get older, issues that you didn't envisage were going to be difficult, the difference between a 5-year-old who doesn't really want to, wants to see each parent kind of every couple of days because it's quite hard for them to be away from the parents, to a teenager who, well, no, I really don't want to go backwards and forward, and as your children get older, we all as parents realise that their needs are changing, and we need to flex, hopefully. The best parenting arrangements are ones where the parents can flex together for their children's needs.
Yeah, we have a 2255 arrangement. So when you were explaining yours earlier, so they have Monday, Tuesday, we have Wednesday, Thursday, and then we do the alternate Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So when you were talking about yours earlier, I was like, I thought 2255 was quite. They're like, now you've got this other day in the middle. He's like, God, that must be really challenging. But which
works for us, but
which did make me think of something else in terms of whether it's nesting or whether it's separating into two homes altogether, is especially in those early days, what was that kind of, I suppose, the handover period of mum, dad going in and out? Was that quite challenging and confusing for both adults and children at the beginning, in those first couple of days and weeks?
So, for us, as I said, it happened organically. So my ex-husband used to work shifts, and so their children were quite used to us being, and I would often go and do long hours, so I would flex my work. So for us, actually, we didn't actually tell the children until it'd been going on for some time, because it was just work arrangements, and for us it fitted with the pandemic as well. Well, mum's going to work at the flat for a couple of days, so it was really organic for us, and it wasn't a big change because we'd had quite separate parenting for a really long time anyway. I think if it's those discussions over how that works, when we explained it, we're like, nothing's changing, you're going to be where you are, like you said, Faye, in your room with your stuff. You'll go backwards and forwards from school. It'll just be, sometimes it's dad in the house, sometimes it's mum in the house. And then for the adults, for handovers, I think it would have been a lot easier without the pandemic, because you've got your sort of going out to work and school, and much as people in separate homes, you know, school is often a great handover because you can have one parent drop off and another parent pick up. But yeah, it was the handovers were a bit. There was no school, there was no going out to work for a period of time. So we didn't have that kind of period where, you know, the house was empty and we could kind of change over while the other one was at work. But other than that, you know, we just had to adapt to that.
No homeschool handovers then.
Yeah, no, there's no. Yeah, I mean, like everyone, we were just winging it, I think, over the homeschool arrangements.
It's interesting you kind of the circumstances that surround you, like you say, the pandemic and working from home and everything else, and make it normalised, so it's not this big thing as well, this huge change. So I suppose, just as a thought, I suppose, for anybody watching this around thinking for yourself, really, for any viewers, about, well, how could we create this and normalise the situation so it's not this big all-encompassing and scary change, to make it every day and make it routine and feel normal. So just kind of a consideration, I suppose, with people. But go on, Beck, you can answer.
That's all right. No, I was going to ask, in your opinion, Rosalind, do people and yourself that do this, is it that great and brilliant that people do this for a long time? I'm quite interested to know your thoughts on, do you see it as a long-term thing until your children reach, I don't know, 16 or 18?
That's a really interesting question, because I have to say I don't have any clients who've done it long term. Like I think Tom said at the outset, it's something that seems to have become, there's a bit of a buzz around it. It's maybe just because it has a name to it. But I don't, you know, so I've been doing family law since 2002, and I don't, even though the name is perhaps new, I don't actually have many clients over all of that time who did that back and forth. It's probably only, I've probably only had clients do it in the last couple of years. And obviously I have a lot of friends who are family lawyers, and when I've explained to them my own personal circumstances, said, oh, I'm nesting, do you have any clients who nest? And a lot of them said, oh no, I've heard of nesting, but none of my clients have done it, or I think I've had one. So I don't know why it's become a more common thing. You know, it might be just around sort of, it works in today's financial landscape. You know, often is a sort of easier financial solution, but I don't see any reason why it couldn't work for a really long time. I do think you would have to be super amicable about the shared space, but you know, if you're lucky enough to have a property, the nest, where actually you can both have separate bedrooms as parents are coming in and out, and you're okay with sharing the common spaces, you know, I guess there isn't a reason why it couldn't be long term. Obviously there are challenges if you want to have a new family or a new partner and you want to completely meld your lives, because that's, you know, unlikely to be very palatable to have new partners in, and also you know, whether you're okay to have that as a kind of a part-time partner. So I can see lots of difficulties with the long term. I can see more difficulties. I think it's great as an interim and transition. I'll be really interested to hear from anyone who's done it long term and done it successfully. But, you know, I think in family law, ultimately, nothing surprises me anymore. Different things work for different, you know, the way people interact. There are just unlimited ways and solutions and things that work for different families. So yeah, maybe there's someone out there who's been nesting for, you know, 18 years.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you. It's fascinating.
Maybe they came up with the phrase. I was wondering, I always think about this, or I'm pondering this sometimes. Would it be situations like this being in other kind of amicable areas of working with your former family? Could it also be indicative of, one, the way the world works financially, etc., these days, but also could it be things from a societal point of view of that, let's say people of our generation are more likely to have, or have a high probability of coming from separated parents anyway themselves, so they've been through it as the children. I know that's one thing for me, that was going through it as 3 years old, my parents separated and divorced and everything we went through, that I recognise the bits that I didn't want to do and the bits that worked, but the bits that didn't. And it's kind of that second generation, that next generation learning. And I think that's what I find personally, but also professionally, is a huge difference of when you've been through that yourself as a child, that you get to understand it more as an adult about the pitfalls and the trials and tribulations that can follow. So it'd be interesting if it's kind of a more modern thought process that's come from a kind of intergenerational development, if you like.
That's a really interesting hypothesis. There's probably a sort of dissertation in there somewhere. Yeah, I'm really interested in that. I don't know.
Maybe if someone else is watching this that's done the study, they can comment as well.
Yeah. I think that, from sort of, we're a society where so many of the current generation of parents have been through separations.
Yeah.
And that is, that's a new period in history, probably.
I sort of thinking as well, I think our generation as well are more kind of up to date with the fact that actually a lot of people put their children first. They're more aware of childhood trauma because of separated parents and etc. So I think it's a kind of a whole melting pot of, as a society, being more accepting of different ways of living and being together and co-parenting.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's no norm. I think we understand there's all the people's family arrangements, in modern times are there's all sorts, and you're not limited to just having two parents. I've dealt with lots of cases where step parents are really involved, and all sorts of complex arrangements where this is just, I think, one of the kind of huge spectrum of different ways in which families can work.
I've got one question, actually, one last question. I know Faye's got one about your tips, so I'll leave her to finish off with that. But there was one that I was thinking of and when we were just talking about situations, birthdays and holidays and things like that. Now, I know in the earlier days of me and my wife separating, it was completely separate. There was more parallel parenting than it was co-parenting. And of course, we weren't nesting, we didn't have two homes. And I always remember a friend of mine, this is 4 or 5 years ago, saying to us about you kind of have to go through a cycle of having at least a year where you've done one birthday, one Christmas. And I said, I think you're wrong. I think it's 2 years, because you need to go through having the Christmas and birthday you have got them as well as when you haven't. So in a traditional kind of, let's say, 1 week on, 1 week off, or whatever it is, and 2 homes, I can understand it. But from a nesting perspective, did you guys still do joint birthdays for the kids? Did you do that?
Yeah, I mean, for us personally, we've done all of the kind of big things in a joint way, because we're amicable, and we were able to share the same space quite easily. So that hasn't been a big deal. I haven't actually looked at what's going forward. I should sort out my parenting plan and think about birthdays and Christmases. But we've been able to kind of work things out as we go along. But that's definitely, I think, one of the big things, isn't it, for that checklist of things to think about. Not only in this possibly what might be an interim nesting period, but long term, how are we going to deal with birthdays? How are we going to deal with Christmas or any other sort of major religious festivals?
But parents' evenings, do we go together rather than trying to book 2 slots and things like that? And I'm very fortunate that myself and my ex-wife, my partner and her ex-husband, we all get on famously well. Now, Faye, you know the story. I won't go into that, so here to interview you. But we all get on so famously well now that we do share the birthdays, and they come over, they come here if we've got the kids in the morning to have a family breakfast. It's Will's birthday this coming Friday, my eldest boy, but it's the weekend with his mum. So we're all going to a laser world together as a family of 8, all of us with our new partners and all the kids and things like that. But again, I think that's, you might have an opinion, as I personally find, I think that it makes I found it makes my 4 kids a lot more emotionally intelligent, a lot more resilient, a lot more trusting and loving, that they have these 4 adults that care about them and support them. And I can't mention the other parent in front of the other one. I suppose the question really is, is that something you think that nesting has really helped with that transition piece to make it feel normal, that actually mum and dad can get on when they're separated?
Yeah, because there's a lot of transitions, there's a lot of shared space, and you couldn't do it if you don't get on. So it's so important, I think, if you possibly can, and it's about that, it's going back to that let it go and that compromise. And if you can share that space, whether that's at Laser World for a joint birthday party, or coming in and having a cup of tea when you're doing the handover, I think if children can see that actually the parents still respect each other and can see you all getting on amicably, that's got to lead to the most sort of emotionally resilient children. We all know how bad conflict is for children, and I don't seek to minimize that at all and say, oh, it's all great, just have a cup of tea, because I understand that is so often just emotionally not possible and so difficult, particularly when there's been, you know, a huge amount of hurt. But it's about, you know, if you can manage it, just at least for respectful communication and the conflict being kept as far away as possible from the children. I think if you try to nest when you weren't amicable, I think that might be risky. That might maybe lead to more conflict because of the shared space. And, you know, as we just going back to those small frustrations, which, you know, often can explode so much because actually what's underlying them is all this hurt and anger, and, you know, whether it's betrayal, grief for the loss of a relationship, whatever it is, you know, that can all come out in a route about the dishwasher, as we know. So yeah, I think, you know, that may be the risk, that nesting exacerbates that, and maybe fuels the conflict, and then it's obviously not the right thing.
We mentioned about respect there. I suppose there's also an element of trust as well. There's got to be a new form of trust, because you, and not to be too like kind of weird and enemy of the state type thing, you have to trust the fact that people aren't putting microphones and cameras and going through your personal stuff when you're not there. Like that, you've got to have a huge amount of trust still in your spouse to be able to.
Yeah, and that's so common, isn't it? I see people all the time who have, you know, really concerned about sort of, you know, digital invasion, whether it's, you know, a Ring doorbell or a camera in the house, you know, during separation. And I think that goes back to the point that, you know, we all, I think, agreed on, that this is not suitable for cases where there's some controlling behaviour, where there's some abusive behaviour. It's got to be, you know, if you've got any concerns about that at all, that's just going to be made so much worse than in sharing the space. You know, and just things like keeping your private documents somewhere, you know, keeping, you know, your personal items, you know, if you can have a room which is lockable, fantastic. Doesn't always work for everyone, but yeah, definitely things to think about, Tom.
I think I've loads, so I'm going to let you carry on.
Yeah, just saying that's kind of brought us kind of to maybe the last question to wrap all this up neatly, even though we could chat about this as we usually do, Tom, all afternoon. If there's somebody listening or watching this thinking, this could work for me, maybe we need to look into this, this could be the solution to all of our problems, what would be your top 3 tips to anybody who is thinking about going into nesting?
Yeah, I think so think through the practical arrangements as that parenting agreement, you know, tick off that checklist and think about how it's going to work with the proposed nesting, and possibly also how it would work with the separate homes, so you can have a comparison. And it's almost, I suppose, like a pro and con checklist, and you may get an idea of how it's going to evolve then. That, you know, the sort of, you know, for me, it was you've got to set your boundaries, but pick your battles. So I think pick your battles was a top tip. And then I think to not lose sight of the ultimate reason why nesting is so often beneficial, and that is for the children, and to be able to put yourselves in the shoes of the children and think about how beneficial this is going to be, however difficult it is for the adults, you know, whatever challenges there are. If you think this is going to work and this is going to be the best for children, don't lose sight of that.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for joining us. It's been lovely. I mean, like Faye said, we could sit here and talk all day about that and ask you a billion other questions, but we'll have to stop at some point. But so if anyone would like to get in contact with yourself specifically, Rosalind, where can they find you? How do they get
yeah, so Rayden Solicitors, you can just Google that, or I'm rf at raydensolicitors.co.uk. Always really happy to just have an initial chat on the phone or email exchange. So yeah, do feel free to contact me about any of those issues.
Thank you. We'll be sharing your contact details in the write-up. I'm pointing like there's a comment box. There you go. We'll but we'll be sharing your contact details on the write-up so people can get in contact with you directly, or if you're just watching this or listening to this, contact myself or Faye. We'll happily put you in touch with Rosalind and the team at Rayden's. And yeah, I think we've got a number of other episodes already scheduled up now for the next couple of weeks, couple of months.
Yeah, we're totally booked up. It's going to be amazing the next few months, I think, Tom.
It is indeed. But thanks again, everybody, for watching. As always, please do leave a comment, whether that is a question or something you enjoyed about it, or maybe there's something else that you want us to talk about. So if you want to come and share a discussion or a topic, do leave us a comment, give us a like as well. And Faye, also for people trying to find you and follow you, how do people find and follow you? I know it comes up at the end, but for anyone that's listening now, we're on podcast as well with YouTube.
My company is called Feel Positive Coaching because I'm a holistic divorce and relationship coach. So you'll find me under Facebook, my website, my Instagram is Feel Positive Coaching. And also, if you're a nester who's been doing this a long time, please get in contact, because I'm sure myself, Tom and Rosalind would love to hear from you.
And if you're writing a thesis on this and the background experiences intergenerationally, we also want to know about that. Yeah, also you can find me, just Google Tom Nash, Mr. Divorce Coach, and you'll find me somewhere on some form of social media or the website, etc. But apart from that, thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks so much for having me.
No worries.
Really enjoyed it.